that we so desperately need because of the types of rents we see happening here in the city of New York. The problem is that our budget. You don't come back. I guess. I hope it comes back. There it is. All right. The problem is that the budget is so. The budget that the leadership in Congress has proposed is so anti-New York that the fact is that even though we have one of the greatest needs for affordable housing in this country, there's no guarantee that we will get that money for affordable housing from that grant, because there's such an anti-New York agenda in the Republican Congress. That's why it would be the worst thing to do is to send another Republican there to add to that anti-New York sentiment. We need to send people who are going to say, stop, you're not going to hurt the people in New York City.
So I have to disagree with Mr. Gentile on the fact that the mayor is doing a lot of great things with affordable housing, because I know for a fact he's not. I mean, what he considers affordable housing, the annual salary that a person has to make to be part of that affordable housing and these new luxury, rentals that are going up, it's so outrageous. I mean, these are people that are rich. We need more affordable housing for people that are working. And like we just mentioned before, we don't have a $15 minimum wage in this state. So how can people afford these rents at these apartments that are going up? So what I would like to do is make sure that we have a program in place to refurbish abandoned buildings in our communities. Right now, we have a lot of abandoned buildings that are just laying to waste. And there's no projects or anything in place to refurbish these and make them green in some way, give them solar panels or mini turbines or anything to make them more self-sufficient and also provide a living affordable rents for people. And the thing about it is, going back to these buildings that are just lying in disrepair, these also later on become crime dens, because it's a place for people to do crime and stuff like that. So if you want to safe neighborhoods, you have to fix the infrastructure that's going around the community.
I have a follow-up.
So, okay, follow-up, and then Mr. Gentile, because you were mentioned by name, you can have 30 seconds to respond. So follow-up.
I don't get like, part of the funding I'm also hear your views about is about transportation, because the federal government is committing a lot of funds for creating transportation infrastructures in cities. Obviously in New York, we have transportation that is just so old and that needs to get upgraded.
What's your position on getting federal resources?
That's a good question. Good question. Right now, the Highway Trust Fund, which helps the federal money that helps repair and rebuild roads and highways, will be bankrupt by the end of May if the Republican House does not vote to put money into it. So we really face a crisis in infrastructure and transportation, because that will affect all of us. What we need to do is a new approach, and I would support the Democratic, it's a bipartisan approach in Congress that would fund the Highway Trust Fund, put $120 billion in the Highway Trust Fund by taxing not the American people, but the multinational corporations who have overseas profits that are not being taxed, to tax them one time at 8.75%, and take the money that's produced from that one-time tax, $120 billion, put it in the Highway Trust Fund. That would help all of us in the country, particularly New York, and then it would add another $50 billion to a special infrastructure fund that we could build new transportation projects. That means maybe elevators here at the subways. It might mean different kinds of new transportation options for the people who live on Staten Island. All those things are possible if we could do that and would not cost the taxpayer one penny.
And I look at sources that we have in our country. So rather than think about offshore situations, as I mentioned before, we're not taxing our corporations, our richest 1% in this country. If we were able to do that, even Wall Street, for example, for Wall Street, whenever there's a transaction that goes through, we collect tax. New York State collects the tax for those transactions. But we're so afraid to let Wall Street go to New Jersey, we rebate Wall Street, all that money that we collect. And all that money that we're giving back to Wall Street can be going into fixing our roads and fixing our public transportation. Staten Island right now, for example, They're told, the bridge toll is like $16. You know, people feel they're imprisoned in their own borough. That's why, you know, they have nowhere to go. Our public transportation, the fares just keep going up and up, the service keeps going down and down, and quite frankly, one of the things I would love to do as Congress is set independent investigations on these authorities. The Bridge and Tunnel Authority, the MTA, because we've seen over and over again, they say we have one set of books that shows a deficit, one set of books that shows a surplus. So which is it, guys?
Next question is by David Lee from Race, directed to Mr. Lane first.
Sorry, did Mr. Gentile have a chance to review?
Yeah.
He did. This has to do with Brooklyn representation. Parts of Brooklyn are much different than the large part of Staten Island. Question is, in what specific ways will you ensure equal access to your offices and constituent services for the Brooklyn neighborhoods?
Yeah, so it's interesting about this gerrymandered district of Brooklyn, which is so upsetting, because I have friends that live in Bay Ridge, but I can't represent them because of the way that this district was cut up. And it's almost like it's done by design so that a particular party can benefit from that. And what I would do is, as I mentioned before, we're going to have district offices to make sure that everyone in the community has open access to everything that they need to have a grievance with or applaud us for doing in the community. And same thing in Staten Island. I mean, but we need to have a presence out there. We need to have the people to feel empowered by their elected official. Yeah, I'm running this. I'm not running this campaign to further my career as a candidate or as an elected official. I'm running this campaign to represent the people, to bring the power back to the people. That's why I'm here. And I want to have an open door policy. And if I move to Staten Island, I'm going to try to find a place where I have the first floor as like for town hall meetings and such, almost like a Gracie Mansion kind of thing.
Gracie Mansion for Congress members, wow. That's a new idea, huh? I've actually had, David, I've actually had some experience in this because when I was the state senator, I represented both Brooklyn and Staten Island. And the Staten Islanders were concerned that as a Brooklynite, I wouldn't represent them well. Well, you know what? I was committed to representing both sides of the bridge, as I would be now as a Congress member, and having fully staffed, full-time district offices, as I do now as a council member, and as I did back then when I was a state senator. And I actually was so committed to that and the sense of duty that I had as an elected official that the Staten Island paper was amazed about how well I could represent them. So I'm the hometown boy in Brooklyn, right? So I will not abandon or forget Brooklyn. Brooklyn will be a major part of what I do, but I'm just as committed to the Staten Island end, and frankly, the Staten Island paper endorsed me twice for re-election to the state senate, saying that I was such a presence there that they almost thought that I lived there. But certainly, my experience has been that I work hard. It's a 7-day-a-week job, and I accept it. But that's what you need to do to fully represent both sides of the bridge.
Can I have a follow-up, please? Being that we're here in this part of Brooklyn, this particular neighborhood, can you tell us what, in your history, what your involvement has been with the Asian community, and what will it be if you do end up going to Congress?
Who's first?
Mr.
Well, my history with the Asian community goes back to the very first year that I got elected in 1997, and every year since 1997, I've interacted even as the Asian community got larger and larger, and more groups came to form in the Asian community. So it's always a growing process, it's a dynamic process with the Asian community because you're growing and you're adding new groups. But certainly, I have funded many of the Asian groups in this area, and certainly both in discretionary money and capital money, and I would continue to look for ways to do that in Congress.
Time's up.
So yeah, I have more personal attachment with the Asian community. My son is 10-year-old. He's been doing Hung Gar Kung Fu for the last 2 years. And I grew up in the Asian community. I went to the High School of Art and Design. A lot of my schoolmates were Asian, and we had the greatest times together. And I embrace all communities, but definitely, and one of the things I feel the most about is every May Day, we have this big rally in Union Square, and a lot of the Asian community comes out for those things because of all the injustice going on around the world about workers' rights and such. So.
The next question is by Steve Chung from UCAB, directed first to Mr. Gentile.
Okay, this question is relating to fairness in tax code. On Thursday, the House Representative voted to repeal the multi-billion-dollar real estate tax. If this were implemented, it will cost the Treasury $269 billion over 10 years. What is your thought on this?
Well, this is a prime example. This is a prime example of the House leadership, a Republican leadership, that is not only anti-New York, but anti-middle class. Because if it's going to result in that much loss of money, that is done to help the millionaires and billionaires in this world, but not the middle class, and certainly not New York City.
Yeah, and I don't blame it on the Republicans. The Democrats work alongside with them in this situation. I have to admit, it's not. It's these two parties. They're tied to the money, and they are not working for the people. And this is why I'm running as a Green Party candidate, because we've said this at least for the last 15 years I've been a Green Party member, that we have to clean up Washington, and we see it time and time again, these injustices.
This is the last question. This is asking about your top policy priorities. If you could have one bill introduced, passed, and signed into legislation tomorrow by President Obama, what would that be and why? And the answer will start with Mr. Lane and then Mr. Gentile.
Well, one of the biggest items on our platform is for a Green New Deal in this country. What we want to do is tear away from our addiction to the fossil fuels industry right now and build an economy based on creating alternative fuel, alternative energy sources. Right now, the people in Congress tell you, oh, it's too far away, that technology is not existing. But we can actually do it, but it just takes the first person to do it. So I would like to push through a bill. Push through, testing. Okay. All right, so I would like to push through a bill for a Green New Deal, which will create jobs, public living wage jobs, to create the infrastructure that we need to build an alternative energy system. And, it's what we say, it's a job creator and it's a planet saver, and we need it.
My first priority would be to pass a minimum wage of $13, getting it to $13 as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes the section with the panelist questions. Now we're going to turn to questions that audience members have submitted. And you will have the same amount of time to answer the audience questions that you did, the panelist questions. And again, we're going to ask you to alternate who goes first. So that means we're going to start with Mr. Gentile. Bay Ridge and its environs has the largest number of senior citizens per square mile. We live on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and Obamacare. John Boehner, in his first 3 months, voted to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and Obamacare, which help us survive. Will you follow his lead if elected or not? And we'll start with Mr. Gentile.
I will not follow John Boehner's lead. No, absolutely not. That's part of why I am running, to go down to Washington and be part of the group that said you can't do this to New York, you can't do this to our seniors. They want to make Medicaid a block grant program. And by making Medicaid a block grant program, the federal government would lose all control over how that money is spent by the states. They want to make Medicare, they want to change Medicare into a voucher system. So they're going to give you a voucher, and you're going to have to go negotiate with your insurance company on your Medicare coverage. And what happens when health care costs go up? Who gets to pay that? You, with the voucher. That is not good for anybody on Medicare. Social Security, right now there is language in Congress that, if passed, would cut the cost of living adjustment for Social Security beneficiaries. We can't even make ends meet in New York City on what we have now. Can you imagine if seniors had to live with a cut in the cost of living adjustment? And in Obamacare, what they want to do by repealing Obamacare is bring back that donut hole in the prescription drug, so that prescription drugs would not be covered for thousands and thousands of dollars that would be your responsibility, not the coverage that you would get under Obamacare. Bad.
Time's up.
Yeah, I would definitely not be following John Boehner as well. You know, and this is a typical thing where, as I mentioned before, how we're attacking, the government seems to attack against the people of color and the poor and the elderly. Let's throw them into the bucket as well too. Right now the government says we have no money for Medicare, Social Security. You know, if we did simple things like open that cap on Social Security, for example. Right now it's $118,000 cap, which means that these millionaires aren't paying their fair share into the Social Security system. If we had a Medicare for all system, we don't have to worry about doing an Obamacare thing mixed with Medicaid or whatever. We would actually have health care that would just pay for everybody. Because right now, our country spends more money on its military and killing people in other countries than it spends for taking care of the people in our own country. And that has to change. And the only way it can change is by having a truly independent voice that's not tied to the corporations, whether it's Walmart or it's Halliburton. We gotta stop kowtowing to those corporations.
This question is directed first to Mr. Lane. Why do people with Medicare get home attendants while those who do not have Medicare cannot get a home attendant even though we pay taxes? I pay for my medicine.
Well, this is, once again, all part of this crumbling system that we have. And I can't even say it's crumbling because it seems like it's designed to work that way. My mother right now, she's going through breast cancer treatment. And she's on Medicare, but she's not, or Medicaid, but she's not getting even she has a home assistant, but not as much as she needs. So that's one of the falsities about it. Nobody should have to sacrifice their health because they don't have the resources to take care of themselves. I have another friend who's got breast cancer too, and she says that her insurance won't cover her breast cancer treatment. Why are people dying in this country when we have trillions of dollars going to kill people in other countries for drones and missiles and military spending? We need to just change our spending habits around, change our budget around so that the people can be taken care of and not treated this way.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a real example of the Medicare system in disarray. And I know, Alan, we've spoken about this a lot over the last couple of year or two, that this is not possible. Frankly, another example of Medicare gone array is that they don't negotiate their own drug prices. They allow the insurers to negotiate with the pharmaceuticals. And so Medicare, what happens, Medicare ends up paying last year $1,000 a pill for hepatitis C medication. Can you believe that? That's why Medicare can't pay for for a day aid, because they're locked into paying $1,000 a pill for hepatitis because the law now says that the insurers are the ones that negotiate with the pharmaceuticals. We need Medicare to negotiate directly with pharmaceuticals. That'll wipe out that high cost, and then we can go back and say, let's take care of the ones we need to take care of.
Okay. The Verrazano Bridge is the only bridge connecting Brooklyn and Staten Island. The fare has been increased a lot in the past decade. If you are elected, will you do something to reduce the cost of driving on the bridge, and what would that be? So we're going to start with Mr. Gentile.
Right. Okay, I've said this many times over that, in fact, we in this, especially on the Brooklyn side, have paid for this bridge 10 times over, right? with all the money we've spent on this bridge. And if we were to do things like fund the Highway Trust Fund, and some of that money would come to the MTA, then the MTA wouldn't be so desperate to go into our pockets all the time to increase bridge fares, right? And I've said even without federal money, and I think we should make sure federal money comes in to help the MTA, but even without the federal money, the MTA, I think, has an obligation to at least the Brooklynites on this side, to give Brooklynites some type of a discount if they have to go over that bridge to Staten Island more than 3 times a month. Because people now go to school on Staten Island, right? Mm-hmm. You work on Staten Island. You have family on Staten Island. And going over that bridge, it separates people. That bridge should not be, should be a unifier, not a separator. And so I'm saying with 3 more trips a month, you get a discount for going over that bridge. And with more federal money to the MTA, we then could talk about reducing the toll altogether on both sides of the bridge.
And I mentioned this before about that bridge. You know, and it's funny because as you're speaking, I'm recalling all these issues that I've gone through in my life, and this bridge is. I used to work in payroll for the Bridge and Tunnel Authority for a bit, and I saw the salaries that people were making. And so when you pay these high tolls, they're just going into salaries. They're not going into maintenance of the bridge. They're not going to really anything but people's pockets. And that's why, as Congress, I would solely love to investigate these authorities, because there is so much corruption that I think we haven't uncovered in these Bridge and Tunnel Authorities and the Metropolitan Transit Authority. And once we get to there, we're gonna break the system apart. Hello, testing 1, 2. Okay, yeah, and that always throws me off when that happens. Yeah, and so once we get in there, we could look and see actually what does it cost to maintain this bridge, and set the fares to a fair rate that it makes sense to maintain it, and knock out these CEO salaries and everything that's being accounted into right now. Because in all honesty, as I said before, if we tax the corporations in the 1%, we can have enough money that this bridge will be free.
This question is directed to Mr. Gentile. How many Asian members have you put on the local community board?
I know Warren Chan, and I believe on Matt's Community Board 11, and I believe on 10, there are several. I don't have the list in front of me, but over the years there have been several, and there will be continue to be more. 4. Alan counted them. There were 4 on Community Board 10. Okay, so that's Alan knows the membership in his head. So there are 4 on Community Board 10, and I only have 3 appointments to Community Board 11, and one of those 3 is an Asian American.
Okay. Next question is about the Common Core. The audience member points out that public students from grades 3 to 8 took the English standardized test last week, and then in a relatively lengthy question that I'm going to just summarize, points out that the Common Cause is very controversial among parents and teachers. The requirement of Common Cause seems to flow, Common Core rather, sorry, seems to flow from the federal government. And so the question is, if you were elected, what is your position on the requirement that the federal government is imposing Common Core on our state schools? So this would go to Mr. Lane first.
Yeah, well, it's funny because we're in this debate right now talking about all the problems with the government, and now we're talking about having them take the lead on our education system. To keep going on, okay. I've been talking about taking the lead on our education system. That's a problem. Common Core is really just a way to corporatize our education system. It's a way for some third-party corporation to write up tests to show how brilliant that they are for making our kids take these tests and ranking them based on that. And it's not even that, it's also that they're putting stakes against the tests and the teachers and the schools and saying, well, if your schools do poorly in this, well then, maybe you should fold and we're gonna move a different school, like a charter school, into its place. And it's been shown that these tests are just poorly written. They do nothing to interpret what the children are learning or what they need to learn. The education should be just done by the teachers at a local level. They know exactly what our kids need. No test can tell you what my 10-year-old knows.
I agree. There's just too much emphasis on the test taking and the importance of these tests in the Common Core. And certainly I think that maybe the goal of Common Core, that every student, wherever you are in the country, would know about the same amount of information and have the same skills, is laudable, but I don't think it's achievable given the different communities and the diversity we have in our country. So I would not believe that the federal government should impose issues like Common Core across the school systems across this country. I think the states and the state education departments have a better handle on what the students need in those particular states and what they need to do to get there, rather than impose the Common Core with a test across the country that, for the most part, becomes the be-all and end-all. It becomes the be-all and end-all of education, and that should not be the case.
So this is going to be the last audience question, and then we will have closing statements of 2 minutes each from each of the candidates. Liz?
This is to first Mr. Gentile. The cost of living is exceeding people's incomes, particularly those of seniors. How do you intend to address this unsatisfactory situation?
Well, certainly, as I said, for those who are working, 75% of those who get the minimum wage in this country are adults. My opponent, my Republican opponent, said to a reporter that he thought the minimum wage was just a college, was only for college students. Well, he's very wrong about that. 75% of those getting minimum wage are adults, and 50% of those 75% are female, or women. So minimum wage is a major issue in this country, and it's not just for college students, as my opponent said. It's a major issue, so we need to help by raising the minimum wage. And many seniors still work, and many seniors get the minimum wage. We need to help them by increasing the minimum wage. We need to help them to make sure that Social Security is secure, that the cost of living doesn't go down but goes up. And we can secure Social Security by taking off the cap of those who contribute. So those who are on the higher end of the income levels can contribute, and by contributing, they will secure Social Security. And we can secure Medicare also by doing certain things. I see my time is almost up, but we can secure Medicare by allowing them to negotiate by themselves and not have to include insurers. All those things, those. All right. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security have to be secure.
Time's up, Vinny. Time's up. And time's up for $13 an hour. So yeah, like we said before, you want to raise it to 13. I'm glad you said that now, because before you were saying 10. So I'm glad you went up to 13. Oh, so there you go. It's back to 10 again. So I want to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, because I feel, once people can get a living wage, they'll be able to work and provide for themselves. There will be some taxes, of course, on those people that are making a higher salary. That comes back into the Social Security fund. So now your Social Security is being replenished. Additionally, as I said before, and I'll keep saying, we have to tax the corporations and the 1%, the fair share. There's no reason why they are getting these huge tax breaks on the guise of job creation and sustainability for the economy, because it doesn't work. It just goes into corporate, the CEO's pockets, and it doesn't go back into our communities. So we need to do that. And also, like I said before, we need to have a Medicare for all system. That way, seniors don't have to worry about, what's my healthcare situation going to be. And I'm glad you touched base on the prescription drugs, because that's another sinister thing that we have going on in this country. It's just a way to extort people for money, and a lot of these drugs aren't even properly tested, and it just creates more problems. And so you need to get more drugs for those other problems that it creates. So there's a lot of things we need to change, but we definitely need a $15 minimum wage, we need Medicare for all, and we need to get out all this corruption that we see in these corporations and our electoral processes.
Okay, time's up. So now we're going to have closing statements from each of the candidates, and we'll conclude with some final remarks from Liz. So we'll start with Mr. Lane, 2 minutes closing remarks.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for putting this all together and including me, because I was excluded in the last Tuesday night's debate. Yeah, and you didn't stick up for me. That's all right, I still like you. So, my name is James Lane, and I'm your Green Party candidate for Congress. And what I'd like to do, as I mentioned before, I've been a Green Party member for 15 years, and during this time, I've worked as a volunteer, as an organizer for things that I feel are really required for this country and required for our society. I want a safe, secure society for our people. You know, one of the things that I'm running for is because I'm a political activist. I'm not a career politician. And I feel that the career politicians have failed us in a lot of situations around this country. We've seen it over and over again. The reason that we're running this election is because Michael Grimm was doing some shenanigans and embezzling millions of dollars or whatever and not taking care of the people in his community. How many times are we going to see this? So that's why I'm running. You know, they failed to make our neighborhoods safe for everyone in our communities. We've touched base on police brutality to immigration. These are all issues that matter a lot to people in this district, and over on the North Shore of Staten Island, we have huge issues with police brutality over there. They feel like they're being patrolled in a prison, and that's not right. We need to do something about that. You know, Congress, for example, another threat to our communities is climate change. We haven't even talked about that really in this thing, but you know, Staten Island and parts of Brooklyn saw the devastating effects of Hurricane Sandy 2 years ago, and nothing has been built back. You know, FEMA's provided money, but we have a Build It Back program that has not built anything back. And so that's one of the reasons, another one of the reasons I'm running. And that's why I said, if we work to build a Green New Deal in this country, we can stop the effects of climate change and make safe communities and give people living wage jobs. And that's why I'm running. So I hope that you vote for me on May 5th on the Green Party line. James Lane for District 11.
All right, Mr. Gentile, 2 minutes.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all for being here. You know, democracy demands that that candidates come out and face the people, answer questions like we did here today, Mr. Lane and I. That's really the basic minimum of a democratic election. And it's unfortunate that the major Republican candidate in this race didn't feel it important enough to be here today or respectful of you enough to be here today and participate in the democratic process of answering questions and facing the voters. And I think you should note that as you go to the polls.